let's see if this works. Preparing to live stream the webinar.
It's now streaming live.
Yeah, it says it is. We'll see. Live stream the webinar.
It's now streaming live. It is working?
It's working.
Oh, okay.
All right. So hello, everyone. My name is Jacob Kyle, and I'm here with Dr. Kavitha Chinnaiyan, and she is, oh wait. Okay. So we're here today to celebrate. This is a week of celebratory events. We're celebrating the launch of our new journal, Tarka. And throughout the week, I have been interviewing and chatting to a number of the contributors. And today I'm joined by Dr. Kavitha Chinnaiyan, who's a friend and faculty member of Embodied Philosophy and someone who contributed two pieces, one interview format and one article to this issue of Tarka. And so we're going to talk a little bit about her contributions and the larger sort of spirit of Bhakti today. So hello, Kavitha, how are you?
Hi, Jacob. It's so good to be here and with everybody.
It's really nice to see you, and I'm glad we finally worked our technical kinks out.
Yeah.
We've gone on YouTube instead of Facebook, so hopefully people can make it over to join in on the conversation. So Kavitha, I wanted to explore just mentioning the two articles. Well, one is an article and then one's an interview. And in the interview, we invited you to reflect on kind of what devotion means to you in the context of your own sadhana. And while, you know, the bhakti is often associated with the Vaishnava and Krishna bhakti tradition, I was particularly interested in featuring you in this issue because I know you have more of a Shaiva or Shakta perspective on devotion. So can you talk a little bit about what devotion means in the context of your own sadhana, and then also maybe, you know, what bhakti more generally means, you know, outside of that Vaishnava context?
Yeah, sure. You know, this issue of Bhakti being a specifically Vaishnava thing is something I hadn't even heard about, you know, growing up in India. And I don't know why the Vaishnavites might have any, you know, claim over Bhakti, because Bhakti is the fuel of any sadhana, you know. And for me specifically, you know, I'm a huge Krishna bhakta. So for me, you know, I understand the Vaishnava context as well, but and you know what bhakti is for me is the fuel for practice. And if you don't love something, and I'm also a mother and a wife and a doctor, and so anything that we do, you know, if we don't have love for it and devotion for it, you know, then it becomes a task, a chore. And for anything in life to be successful, right? You've heard of this. You need to have both devotion and dedication. Devotion comes from the heart, and dedication comes from the mind and the brain, and you need both. And so if you don't love the, you know, in the beginning, the idea of God, then in any form, then what would make you want to pursue that? You know, even to have curiosity, you have to have some, you know, you might begin with curiosity, and then you kind of, it's when you actually fall in love with God that the path actually becomes more real, and there is suddenly an accelerated progress. And you know, I have a very long history in Advaita Vedanta and studied it for several years, and And Shankara says, in the Viveka Chudamani, that bhakti is love for, I'm paraphrasing, but bhakti is this devotion to awareness, to this higher self, and um, to what we might say in the Shaiva tradition, to Shiva, the ground of being. And because if you don't love that, then you can't, move your attention from everything else to that. Because it's only when you fall in love with awareness, or Shiva, or Shakti, or Krishna, whatever we want to call that, that is when you are motivated to do whatever it takes, whether it's waking up in the morning to meditate, or to do various practices, or to even fall deeply into this idea of surrender, and to give in. So does that answer your question?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I want to go back to something that sort of stood out for me, which I loved you mentioning that you're a Krishna Bhakta as well. And so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about how, especially, and I also appreciate you pointing out that this is perhaps I don't know if it's just Western or specifically American, but perhaps it has something to do with the history of the ISKCON movement in the United States and its sort of emphasis on bhakti, and so people associated with that. I'm not really sure. That's just my kind of a guess. Um, but this idea that like, oh, if I'm a Krishna Bhakta, then that exempts the Shaiva Bhakti. This sort of sectarian idea that one should be one or the other, and you're obviously a perfect example of that not being true. So is this how does the qualities of Krishna kind of speak to you as a practitioner, in contrast to the qualities of Shiva or the goddess, for example? Like how does that all reconcile with each other?
This idea of things reconciling is also very foreign to me. I don't need to reconcile anything.
Yeah.
I can be absolutely madly in love with Krishna, which I am, and yet be a Shaiva, and yet be a Shakta, which I am. And, it is, and if we want to look at qualities per se, right? The perfect example of that would be the 11th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna shows his Vishwarupa. Everything is in him, right? And then similarly, you go to the Devi Mahatmyam, and you have the similar thing of everything is in Devi. And you go to the Shiva Puranas, and everything is in Shiva, right? So it's at any given point in time, it is what calls out to me. And while we are here, let me also say that I am a huge Hanuman Bhakta. So and so it has never crossed my mind to reconcile anything, and file away things neatly, because such a thing doesn't exist.
Yeah.
My devotion is to divinity in whatever form. And many times it is myself. I'm devoted to myself, right? Because ultimately that is what we are talking about here. So
I really appreciate you saying that. I think that's such an important point, and I wonder if that also is partly, I think, would you say that perhaps that is kind of, Hindus from India, they're not brought up with this idea that like, oh, one is this, one is that, and it's sort of the kind of the sort of Western academic desire to compartmentalize and understand these things in their own, categories and strains and lineages, that sort of encourages this idea that one must follow this path and be true to it, as in this weird, like, football team kind of way.
yeah, to be fair, such things also exist in India. And
Right.
there are the Shaivites and the Vaishnavites, and in some communities they don't even talk to each other.
Oh,
And that exists. But what happens, in many, like in Sri Vidya, for instance, there are so many deities, and there's perfect acceptance and devotion to each deity, without really thinking, well, I should only be devoted to Lalita Mahatripura Sundari. because she's all encompassing, and she is also Matangi, she is also Varahi, she is also Bala Tripura Sundari. So she's also Shiva, and so the perfect example of this is in the Lalita Sahasranama, right? In the 1,000 names of Devi, it includes everything, all the other deities as well. So, and this idea of practice. Now, I just want to mention one thing. When it comes to practice, however, I do agree that it's really important to dig in one spot,
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise you're digging too many shallow, holes and getting nowhere. So I think with respect to practice, I think it's really important to have one core practice, and then all the other things that you do are really supportive of that core practice, be it mantra or whatever it may be. But devotion, on the other hand, bhakti you can play with. You can be the more bhakti you cultivate, in my personal experience, the more you cultivate towards various deities, your heart opens in unfathomable ways.
Hmm. Are there also, I like what you were saying, that it's sort of variable. And does it vary sometimes depending on the type of situation that you're going through? Like, for example, when you're going through hardship or sadness or heaviness of heart, is there a specific deity that tends to feel more comforting and it sort of becomes a better, I don't know, relationship to support you in that process? Or is that a way to think about the shifting, um, you know, bhakti representations, or is it something else?
That's a good question. And it really depends on who you ask,
Right.
because there are practitioners and lineages which will say, okay, here, the remedy for this is this, and the remedy for this is this deity. Um, and that's okay. That approach is okay. But see, I told you earlier, I'm a mother, right? And so if I'm looking at myself from the standpoint of my children, right? It can't be that I'm only available to them for one thing, right? So I should be available for all of their needs at all times. And they can call upon me if they're scared, or if they are happy, or if they are stressed, or whatever it may be.
Mhm.
Right? They may call me by different names, mom, ma, this, ma, amma, whatever it may be, but I'm the same person. And so, if we start to have these kinds of remedial kinds of relationships with deities, that becomes conditional. And here, what we are trying to do is break through that. Ultimately, I'm a non-dualist. So my foundation is in non-dual Shakta and Shaiva Tantra. And so that makes no sense to me. It's ultimately there is only one. And whatever we may call that, we should be able to call upon that at all times. And so I'm not such a huge fan of that approach, although I know that it exists and it's quite widespread. I think if I'm a lover of Lalita Devi, she's perfectly capable of taking care of me under all circumstances.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. So is there a way of being a like, I'm just imagining an example of someone who perhaps isn't quite comfortable in some way with a relationship with a deity form, and but they tend to feel that they have, for example, something like what you're talking about for nature, or some other expression. Does bhakti, the definition of it, necessarily require that the object of that devotion is divine, or can it be something more secular?
Well, everything is divine. And
I agree.
so, if you look at certain examples, in various bhakti traditions, um, if you think about how God is approached, right? God is approached as a spouse, or a lover, or as a child, or as a parent, or as nature or whatever, right? So the beauty of bhakti is that the divine is available in infinite forms. So nature is like perfect, and it doesn't have to be a deity. It doesn't have to have a form. And the reason that forms work is that most of us have, we have, what do you say, we have created God in the image of man. So it's easier to think of God in our own image, right?
Yeah.
Rather than something that's formless and infinite and has no attributes. But that's where we get to anyway, through this path of bhakti, whether it's to a deity or to nature or to your own children or to your own life. Ultimately,
Mm.
that is the goal, is to fall into that formless, all-encompassing one.
Mm. Beautiful, beautifully said. Okay, Kavita, I want to talk about your article that you wrote, Bhakti in Tarka, which, of course, the issue, the title of the journal is Tarka, and so this is a great kind of way to how you explore the relationship between Bhakti and Tarka in your article. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. You know, we ordinarily think of tarka as this like a rigid, a left brain kind of an activity, right?
Mhm.
When you say tarka, it to some of us it seems like it is not bhakti. It
Yeah.
is, bhakti is very sweet and more kind of soft, whereas tarka is sharp and because it's discernment, right?
Yeah.
It's the foundation of or discernment is the foundation of tarka, which is this perfected reasoning and logic. And we think of that as a left brain kind of activity. And again, the example of this, I would go back to the Viveka Chudamani, which is by Shankaracharya, which is, Viveka Chudamani means the crest jewel of wisdom. And so that whole text is about Tarka, actually, which is Viveka. A little bit different, but the Viveka is discernment and Tarka is logic. And of course, Abhinavagupta places Tarka as the highest form of yoga.
Yeah.
And so this in order to even understand what Tarka is, right, which is the ability to discern between finer and finer and finer points that are distinct. So in my language, if anybody is listening who can speak this language, I'm a cardiac imager. So in cardiac imaging, you have to the ability of a test to differentiate between two tiny structures is called resolution. It's called resolution. So it's called spatial resolution or temporal resolution. And so discernment is like that. It is the ability to distinguish between increasingly subtle things, such as awareness and objects that rise in awareness. And this is something that we can't just fall into. This is a process of having worked through other grosser forms of discernment. Now, remember what I said earlier, which is you have to fall in love with awareness in order to be able to know the difference between awareness and everything else that isn't that. In order to come to the understanding that there is one that is everything, we have to first come to the understanding that there is nothing. So that nothingness or the emptiness is what leads to everythingness and the wholeness.
Mm.
And to be able to differentiate that, right, it takes a very sharp kind of ability, to be able to say, well, this thought, this subtle emotion, this subtle vibration is an arising in awareness, and I am that awareness. And what is arising in me is not, it is not awareness, is the first conclusion we need to come to, that it's an arising in awareness. And eventually, through continued self-inquiry, you come to this understanding that if it is arising in awareness, it can only be made up of awareness. So first you come to this thing that nothing exists other than awareness. And then you come to the understanding that all exists in awareness as awareness. But that process is known as tarka. That process of discernment is known as tarka. Now, if you don't have love for awareness, you're going to be pulled into the drama of your mind, into the drama of the arisings. This is called Maya, right? This is Maya, because she is so strong. She pulls you into that, the arisings and everything that's going on within that, and keep you from taking that step back. It's only when you fall in love that that process becomes natural, right? And it is through that heart opening of bhakti that we become aware of that awareness in the first place. And to continue that process, because somebody told me recently when I was teaching a class, awareness is boring. I'd rather be, nothing's happening there, right? Nothing's happening in awareness. I'd rather be in the drama of my mind because it's much more exciting. And so what I was telling that person is, but once you fall in love with awareness, right? It's like being with your lover. And that's a misnomer, because there is no width. You are that subject, you are that awareness. And to come to that conclusion, it's like the feeling, or the closest emotion that comes to that is love. It's devotion, to come to that understanding and the realization that I am this, I am that. And so that without bhakti, you can't really make progress, in tarka.
Yeah, because
that falling in love has to happen.
Right. Otherwise, you'll just think it's boring and not worth it.
Or it becomes a chore, right? And the more you make this into a purely intellectual process, the more frustrated you're going to become, because it isn't an intellectual process.
Well, that's what I was going to ask next, is that what I hear you saying is that this is something that's experiential. It's not merely cognitive in that sort of like intellectual discernment sort of way, the typical way we associate that term discernment. So, is the falling in love something that happens organically and completely spontaneously, or is it something that someone can work to cultivate so that they don't, sit down and meditate and are totally bored in their meditation practice?
Yeah, it depends. And this is why, the whole, the whole issue of working with the deity is so effective. Because once you cultivate a relationship with the deity, right, of whatever relationship, like I said with Krishna, and Krishna is a perfect example of this, of how, if you read the Bhagavatam, of how different people had a relationship with him. He was a child, this baby that's still worshipped as a baby. and a lot of people are very much in love with that form of him. And then, of course, when he grew up in Vrindavan, all the gopis were in love with him as this young, attractive, and charming, adolescent. And then, of course, then he leaves and goes and becomes a kingmaker. And that is a form that I am absolutely in love with, this politician and the peacemaker and the kingmaker. And then, there are stories of people who had a relationship with him as an enemy. Shishupala is a perfect example of that. And they were in love with him as an enemy. Can you believe that? Look at the contradiction there. And all they could think about was Krishna and how much they hated him. And so, but it was their constant remembrance that, even when they die, actually he kills Shishupala in a war, in a battle, and he is granted liberation, because all his life, all he could think of was Krishna, even though he thought of him as an enemy. So whatever relationship we have with the deity, it is cultivating that love. It's like saying, um, will if you choose to be in a long-term relationship, how do you cultivate that closeness and the intimacy and the ongoing love with your partner, right? Isn't that a process? That's a process. It's not like we are given a manual along with that person and say, here, love him like this or love her like this, right? It doesn't happen like that. So too with the deity, we have to cultivate a relationship, and that constant giving and this constant intimacy with that, just is one way of cultivating this love, where you are falling deeper and deeper and deeper in love with that.
Beautiful. So you're talking so much about deity, so I feel like we might as well plug your upcoming course that
Yeah.
is happening in another month, called Deity and Devotion. So right on the topic of what we're exploring. Do you want to talk? I know that you've recently, you've decided to work with one deity. Do you want to tell those that are tuning in or that will listen to this later, what they can expect from the course?
Yeah, so this will be a 4-week course, and over this time we will actually only work with one deity, but in this way of cultivating a relationship in various stages, and moving from the dualistic, from the very external dualistic ritualistic kind of a relationship, to the more subtle and the non-dual relationship of the deity, where you experience oneness with that deity. So that's what we're going to try to explore over the 4 weeks.
Beautiful. Well, I look forward to it, certainly. And so I want to just mention again that the issue of Tarka that Kavitha and I have been exploring is called On Bhakti, and it is available now at embodiedphilosophy.com/Tarka. I'll let you take a look at the beautiful cover once again. The cover, of course, designed, or the whole issue designed by our wonderful friend, Ryan Lemaire. And so you can get a copy of that in either physical or digital form at embodiedphilosophy.com/Tarka. You can also decide whether or not you want just this issue or you want to receive the other 3 issues that will be happening this year. One is on ecology or divine ecology. One is on illusion, and another one is on the topic of the scholar practitioner. So I hope you'll check that out if you're interested. So Kavitha, as we close, is there any other kind of thoughts or reflections you'd like to leave our viewers or our listeners with regards to this, broad topic of bhakti?
Yeah, I think I would really discourage people from thinking about bhakti in one particular way. Bhakti doesn't look any particular way. Bhakti is not about kirtan. It's not about bhajan. It's not about ecstasy and dancing and all of that. Sitting in meditation every morning is bhakti, because if you didn't love it, you wouldn't be on some level. Listening to this, even tuning into this is bhakti. Everything that you do for your sadhana, it comes from bhakti. You don't have to be doing kirtan. Trust me, you don't. That is not the only form of bhakti. That is only one. And by the way, I'm not into that either. So, and I consider myself first and foremost a bhakta, and then a jnani. So, it bhakti comes in your form, the way you are and the way you approach your practice, your sadhana. Whatever it is that you're doing, that love and the attitude that you bring to it, that is your signature bhakti. So I don't know where this idea has come from. Again, a very Western thing, that bhakti equals kirtan or the Vaishnava thing. It's not like that.
I mean, nothing wrong with kirtan. It's fun. But
No, but
I
it
appreciate,
doesn't have to be.
yeah, yeah. And I appreciate you pointing that out. Well, it's been great to chat with you, Kavita, and thank you so much for joining me, despite our technical challenges at the beginning. It's always a pleasure to see you. And do you want to share anything else with the listeners about what's ahead for you?
Yeah, absolutely. My new book is out on the Lalita Sahasranama and it's available on Amazon. It's called Glorious Alchemy Living the Lalita Sahasranama. And I've explored Bhakti there quite a bit because the entire tradition rests on Bhakti. And I have a few courses coming up as well, including a 1-year course on the Devi Mahatmyam that starts in the fall. So,
Excellent.
yes.
Excellent. So, and that you can find that at, is it kavitamd.com?
Yes.
All right. So check that out. Check out her website if you're interested. Yes, your book is beautiful, and you can also see a little blurb from me in the on the 4th page. I'm very proud of it.
Oh, yes. Yes. Thank you so much for that.
My first blurb, so it was quite fun to do. And I was delighted to do it for such a beautiful offering that you had written. So thank you. All right, Kavita, thanks so much. And thanks everyone for tuning in. And we'll see you once more tomorrow with Miles Neal at 11 a.m. We'll be talking about pilgrimage and bhakti. And we will try to tune in on Facebook Live at 11, but it might also be YouTube Live as it was today. So, be sure you're following us on both of those channels if you want to tune in live with us. All right. See you tomorrow.
Take care.